Hi, good evening, UK Crime Book Group. My name is Amit Dhand, and I am delighted to be joined by Joseph Knox. And what we're going to do is we're just going to have a chat really for the next hour or so and explore some crime fiction, how we got started, the books that we write, and if there's any questions that pop up on the right hand side of our screen, we'd be delighted to answer them. So I am the author of the Harry Verdi series. My debut was Streets of Darkness, which I'm just holding up to screen there. And I've got 4 books in the Harry Verdi series, which explore crime drama in my home city of Bradford. My latest book, which is the one I'm going to be talking about this evening, is called The Blood Divide. I'm going to have to hold up my phone because I don't actually have a physical copy. And I wonder if you can see that on there. But it's called The Blood Divide, and it's an international thriller which is half set in Bradford and half a chase across India. I'm going to hand it over to Joseph, who's going to tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll get into it.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joseph Knox, and I'm the author of the Aidan Waite's trilogy, which began in 2017 with my debut novel, Sirens. And the most recent entry came out last year, which was The Sleepwalker. Similarly to Amit, I'm going to be talking largely about my newest book, which is called True Crime Story. It's, again, similarly to Amit, a standalone novel and something just a little bit different from what I've done before. I can see someone has said hello there in the side, Facebook user. Hello to you too.
Yeah, we have an audience. Joe, I just wondered if you wanted to start off by telling us a little bit about how you arrived here, your crime journey. I guess a lot of people that are tuning in maybe writers who are wanting to get published. So I just thought if you could take us through how you got there.
Absolutely. Well, I was always a writer from a very young age. I had terrible insomnia when I was a kid, and so I could never sleep. I was always going to school with huge bags under my eyes to the point that the teachers thought something terrible was going on. But the big problem was that I just couldn't sleep, and so I started to basically read anything that was on the shelves, and that meant my parents' books that were around the house and a lot of terrible kind of Reader's Digest type hideous leather bound pleather bound hardbacks of Sherlock Holmes with gold leaf pages, you know, the type of things that no one ever in their right mind reads. It's in like font smaller than, you know, chemistry small print or whatever. And I just really became addicted to it through that. And I was always writing, I was always reading, and I was always trying to write a novel. But I think it wasn't until I really fell for crime fiction that became a reality to me. I think I needed the framework, I suppose, of a crime novel. I came to noir, and by which I mean like the old hard-boiled stuff, like The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon, from a very young age because I got dumped by the girl I was seeing, and I kind of tragically Googled, you know, what do you do when you've got a broken heart? And one of the answers was watch Casablanca. So I became the youngest, most tragic fan of Casablanca that you've ever seen. And of course, in Casablanca, you've got Humphrey Bogart. And so I just became the biggest fan of everything he'd done, which included The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon. And so I watched those films, and then I realized they were books. And from there, I was just completely hooked onto crime fiction. And I spent 8 years writing my debut novel, Sirens. So I started it when I was 22, and it came out when I was 30 in 2017. And during that time, it changed so many times. You know, it changed title, the characters changed, but mainly I was just learning how to write. Um, the first few things you do, and certainly the first few drafts, are always terrible. And for me, I think it took like about 4 years before it even really started to sound like human language. What about you? How did you come to it?
Yeah, before I get into that, I've just seen a question on there which says, I'm intrigued to know what I was listening to when my wife scared me yesterday. So I tweeted yesterday that I had a near-death experience. And it really genuinely was a near-death experience, because it's definitely the closest I came to having a heart attack in the past few years. So I have this routine that when I'm writing, and if I'm trying to create an idea, I will sit right where we are now. I will put my headphones in. I will turn all the lights off in this room, and I will sit here in the dark with loud, dramatic music. And I will put my head on the desk, eyes closed, and I will listen to this music until the right idea pops into my head. And there is just one rule, which is do not come into this room when that happens. So I had told my wife, I'm in the room, I'm in the dark, I've got the music on, and she knows that the rule is she'll phone me or text me to say I'm coming in. So I'm in the zone, I'm thinking about some really dark crime fiction. I've got Hans Zimmer playing the Dark Knight soundtrack. I mean, I literally terrify myself until the idea arrives. And I'm doing this quite happily. And then after about 30 minutes of doing this, I've got my head down like this, and I sit up and I open my eyes and I see this shadow here next to me, and I turn and my wife is just standing there. So I screamed, and then she screamed, and then everybody screamed. And then we had this domestic, right? Because I was just like, the rules, right? I mean, I literally nearly had a heart attack, right? Because when I opened my eyes, I mean, I'm not in this room. I'm somewhere doing some dark stuff. So yeah, I was listening to the Dark Knight soundtrack for one of our. Samantha's asked the question, what was I listening to when she scared me? And genuinely, right, I don't scare that easily, but it's quite unnerving when you open your eyes and she just.
No, you jumped into my arms quite often, I think.
Well, yes, I would if you were strong enough to carry me, Joseph. But also the thing is,
just try me.
The movie that scares me the most is Paranormal Activity, because I don't know if anybody's seen it, but the woman in there, she just stands up and stands next to the bed watching her husband, right? And I've always thought that must be the freakiest thing, because if I ever open my eyes and my wife is stood there over the bed just watching me while rocking, right? I mean, I would freak the hell out. So she knows.
What's this got to do with books?
Yeah. I was answering the question. I've gone off at a tangent. Anyway, how I started writing was it's because everybody on Twitter was asking me what music I
think we all know how you started writing after that. You basically started telling a story,
never stopped.
And never stopped.
I was brought up in a video rental library, right? And my earliest introduction to crime fiction was not finishing Silence of the Lambs, the movie, which I was watching when I was not old enough to watch it. And I didn't finish the movie because I was too scared. And I used to go to the Bradford Central Library every weekend. And on this particular weekend, I came across the book Silence of the Lambs. And I'd never realized that books transferred to screen, which is hopefully something that we'll talk about a bit later on. So I had to take the book out because I was just really intrigued to understand why the book and the movie would have the same title. And whereas I didn't finish the movie, I did finish the book. I couldn't believe that it was late at night and I couldn't stop turning the page. Even though I was terrified and scared, I kept reading. And it was my first introduction to crime novels. And I started writing pretty soon afterwards. And like you, it took me a long time. So I started writing Streets of Darkness in 2006. I got my first agent in 2008. And then I got published in 2016. So it was a 10-year journey. 66 rejections, which broke my heart. But eventually managed to get a publishing contract. And for me, the Harry Verdi series was about representing a character in literature that we hadn't seen before. So I was very aware that all of the books I had read and very much enjoyed always had, a white detective who was, an alcoholic, a workaholic, those kind of hard-boiled crime.
What are you talking about?
Crime novels. I thought I'd never seen. I wanted to represent my world, and one of the questions that are asked is how do our upbringings and environments impact our writing styles? And for me, being brought up in Bradford, I wanted to reflect the city and some of the topics. I tend to write sort of socio-political crime commentary, I call it. So I wanted to reflect that in a crime fiction sort of commercial thriller, which would tell us about the world around me in the world that I inhabit. And I hadn't seen that done in crime fiction before. So that was my sort of entry and journey into crime fiction. Joe, I'm interested that both of us have done sort of a series. I've got the Harry Verdi series, you've got the Aidan Waite series, but true crime story, for me, is about as far removed from what you would normally write. And I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about how you got there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think the reason I wrote it was to write something as far from Sirens as possible, in a sense, because I guess I'd spent 8 years writing that book, and then I spent the next 2 years writing the follow-up. The next year writing the follow-up, The Smiling Man, and the year after that writing the follow-up to that, The Sleepwalker. And so I'd really spent 10 years in this world, and it's a pretty dark old place. And I felt as well like I had the stories were getting bigger and bigger, because I was trying to do more and more. I was trying to really give people that great start to finish read that has everything you want in it: action, romance, love, betrayal, twists, etc. But in the course of doing that, the books were getting, I suppose, grander and grander in scope. And I think when I came to the end of Sleepwalker, I did feel that things could not get much bigger without starting to become ridiculous. And so I was looking for something different to do. Now, at the same time, you will know this very well, and it's something we've talked about. If you write crime fiction, you can be put into into a certain bracket. And if you write police novels, you can be put into yet another bracket. And people kind of can assume that's all that you're capable of. And indeed, until you try something else, you assume that's all you're capable of as well. And so I just really wanted to force myself out of my comfort zone and do something as different as possible. Now, what am I on about? Well, a true crime story is a novel, but it's one that opens with a disclaimer from the publisher saying that Joseph Knox has been removed from the project, number one. Number two, it consists of several emails going back and forth between me and another writer called Evelyn, who is researching a true crime story, and she's come to me with it. And number three, the main, I would say the main body of the book is made up of a series of interviews with the friends and family of a missing student, who, as the kind of book tells us, in the early hours of Saturday, 17th of December 2011, Zoe Nolan, a 19-year-old Manchester University student, walked out of a party taking place in the shared accommodation where she had been living for 3 months. She was never seen again. What I really wanted to do was not only set myself a challenge, but I suppose set a sort of challenge to the crime fiction community as well. I was reading an article, I think it must have been last year when I started the book, saying that crime fiction is now the biggest genre in the UK. It outsells general fiction. And I think that's wonderful if you love crime fiction, and I think it's really good for readers because there's a lot of great stuff out there. But at the same time, I think it does put pressure on crime writers to try and do new things and to try and find new shapes for the crime novel and to take us by surprise in a way that, perhaps we haven't seen before. And so I thought this idea of blending fact and fiction and involving myself in the story, and in a pretty unflattering way, could be a really interesting idea. And it's a mad one. And I think the first few people I showed it to, it took them a minute to come around to the idea of this kind of very unusual crime novel that has an element of self-sabotage built into it, because what I'm doing with this book is I'm trusting readers that they are advanced enough and that they are sharp enough, which, you know, I think most readers are. I think the amount of times I've met people at events who were one step ahead of me or the other crime writer, or, you know, whoever they might be reading at the time, you learn again and again. Don't underestimate people. And so I wanted to give those kinds of readers something that they could just really vanish into and become obsessed with. So it was a challenge for me. It's a challenge for my publisher, and, you know, hopefully it won't be too much of a challenge for readers, and that they will just see it as something a little bit different and a little bit fun. You as well are coming from writing 4 series books, all of them some of the most tense, pacey, self-contained kind of real read in one sitting body slam books, I think. And with this, you know, this great kind of, as you say, socio-political undercurrent coursing through them as well, which I think really does give them something unique. I wanted to say, when you were talking earlier, that you were writing a hero who you had not seen on the shelves. And I think what's interesting is that hero still, you know, Harry Verdi still really stands out. Things have not changed that much in publishing, which I think is really interesting. You know, you are still kind of right at the front of that queue. So I'm really interested to know why you came to the idea of writing a standalone as well, and one that really is, you know, just as different in its way as mine. You know, your books have all been very, very Bradford set, right down on the ground. Now it feels like we're going up in the air.
It's similar to you, actually, Joe, because I wanted to write a book that was part truth and part fiction. And, you know, the cover for The Blood Divide says on it, you know, the tagline is 1 million dead, one violent legacy, one man hunting the truth. And the book basically explores 1947 and the partition of India, but in a real-time way, here and now. So I've always been fascinated by the partition of India and the British colonial rule coming to an end. And when partition happened, there was so much death and destruction, with 2 countries trying to figure out their identities, and the biggest migration of people that had ever happened before. And I've read a lot of books, non-fiction books, about this. But like you, I recognise that crime fiction is the biggest selling genre. And I wanted to write a crime thriller which explores those times, albeit here and now today, in a commercial way, to try and engage conversations about those times. So with the Harry Verdi series, you can explore crime in a way which engineers dialogue, which says, actually, let's talk about, you know, race relations, let's talk about grooming, let's talk about honor killing, let's talk about terrorism. And I think if you do it in a specific way that encourages dialogue, then your crime fiction book can actually be something that becomes something larger, and people can learn things, they can examine things. And I'd say that actually that most crime thrillers are an exploration of something larger than just the crime that happens on the page. Certainly the ones that I like anyway. You finish them and you start asking yourself questions. So with The Blood Divide, I thought, let me see. There's a true story. So the prologue in The Blood Divide is a really, really horrifying true story, which was told to me as a child. And I won't use any spoilers, but the prologue is basically a story that I was told when I was younger, as a way of reminding me about the horrors of partition and what you mustn't do in life. You know, you mustn't cross the divide. You mustn't do these types of things. And this story had always stayed with me as a kid. And then when I got older, I would speak to other South Asian people, and they'd heard this story as well. And then I got to thinking, is it true or not? And I don't know about you, but for me, once an idea is in your head, little seeds there, it continues to grow, and then it doesn't go away until you answer that question. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to go to India and have a look at this, because I just couldn't sleep at night, and I I needed to know the truth. So I got on a plane by myself with a rucksack. I landed in Delhi for 7 hours. I got a 7-day ticket. Landed in Delhi. I grabbed a taxi driver and I said, "Listen, mate, this is what we're going to do. This is the journey that we're going to do. It's the same journey my character does. He does it over 72 hours. I think I took 96 hours today." I said, "We'll stop."
A question I just really wanted to ask was the Verdi series are all set over these really, really tight time spans. So I think in one case, 24 hours, you've got the whole novel in that time.
Yeah.
Was that something you were intentionally putting into this book, or is it? I know you to ratchet up the tension.
Yeah.
I'm just really interested if it made it into this book. And
it did. So the Blood Divide is 5 days. Five days.
Wow.
So, so you're right. Streets of Darkness was 24 hours. Girl Zero is 48 hours. City of Sinners is 96 hours. And with One Way Out, I went right back to 18 hours. I like to use the clock, the ticking clock, as a way, as a tool, basically, to ensure that, first of all, the pace is good. And it reminds me that the clock is ticking. It's series 24, always ticking. That's always in my head when I write, because I just want a really fast read that gets people through it as quick as possible and gives them an adrenaline rush. So when I started the Blood Divide, I knew that the clock was going to be there as well. And it's 5 days. So when I got to India, I just said to this taxi driver, "This is the route that we're going to do." I had no plan of what was going to happen. And we went from Delhi all the way up to Amritsar, to the Wagah border of India. And it was it was quite dumb when I look back on it to do it that way, because got myself into some interesting situations, let's call it.
Well, I was going to say, I think researching a book set in Bradford has its own dangers, but researching an international chase thriller, can that get dangerous?
Yeah, well, I just want it to be as authentic as possible. And one of the chapters in the book explores a place called Sadar Bazaar, which is the largest underground market in India. And when I say it's large, I mean it's the size of a small city. And if you're lost in there, and I was so lost in there, and it's hot and it's humid, and it's unbearably hot, and everyone's trying to sell you something, and there's no map of how to get out. You just ask one person to the next person, and no one gives you the right answer because they want you to buy something. And I just remember being in this maze, in this underground market. And I'm an obvious tourist as well, so everyone's flocking to me because they want me to buy something. And I thought to myself, if there had ever been a place set for a chapter in a crime thriller drama, this has to be the place. So I learned a lot, and I wanted it to be as authentic as possible. So when I came back to England, I wrote the journey that I had been on, albeit with my character, obviously. And I think that level of authenticity is something that I like doing. So the Harry Verdi series are always described as fact meets fiction. And I think the Blood Divide is very similar to that, and probably similar to you. I don't know, with True Crime Story. Do you gear it up that way, that readers ask themselves which bit is fact and which bit is fiction? Because
it's been an interesting thing to see the early reviews, actually, because I have seen everything from people frustrated that they couldn't work out what was real and what was fake. I've seen people saying, I've seen one review that took the whole thing as completely fact, which to me is great. That means I've done my job as well as possible. And I've seen all kinds of things in the middle. Yes, I do want to ask those people. I do want to ask that question of people, because I think the world asks that question of us constantly at the moment. Is this real? I feel like we're surrounded by so much, quote unquote fake news. You see the effects of things like QAnon and conspiracy theories on vast swathes of people. You see, the storming of Capitol Hill in America came from QAnon, a conspiracy theory. And so I feel like at the moment in life, we are constantly being asked this question. We are constantly seeing a blending of fact and fiction. And depending on the person who's handing you that document or file or post or what have you, you really have to interrogate their motives. And I want people to interrogate mine because I'm asking other questions as well. Some of them are about police inadequacy. Some of them are about the way that the media reports about missing blonde women. And some of them are about whether a writer even has the right to write about these things, whether I am the person who is allowed to write this story. I want people to be asking those questions of themselves and of me as they read it. And the books I read are the ones that leave me with questions still in my head. So that's very much what I'm trying to do, certainly. One thing I did just want to ask you about, sorry, was your main character. Did you call him Jax? Was that his name?
Jack, yeah. So his name is Jatinder.
I was wondering how you see him as different from Harry.
So Harry is Hardeep Verdi, and Jack Baxi is Jatinder Baxi. So in the Asian community, you always get given a nickname, which then just stays with you forever. And it's really quite common. So he's totally different from Harry Verdi. Harry Verdi is my, heroic maverick cop who literally breaks and bends every single rule to get the bad guy. I love writing Harry that way. I don't like police procedure, which gets into so much detail about form filling and how long could someone be in custody. I just want my hero to kick the bad guy's butts in as dramatic way. And I want vengeance and I want anarchy. And that's Harry. Bradford is my Gotham and Harry is my Dark Knight, and he wants to save the city. And I love, love, love writing him that way. But with Jack Baxi in The Blood Divide, he is late 40s, nearly 50-year-old corner shop keeper who's basically he's basically lost his wife many years ago, and he's fallen into this kind of pit of despair where it's just the same every day and it's monotonous and it's boring. And the book opens up with him waking up with the police knocking on his door. He's worried because he's done a few naughty things inside the corner shop that he shouldn't do. And he thinks, God, the police are here. My time is up. They're finally going to bust me for these illegal activities that I've been doing. But what he doesn't expect is that a young girl, 22 years old, is thrown into his corner shop with him, and both are brutalized. And this detective just wants information that neither of them have got any clue about. And the book sets up from there, two people who are thrown together from different walks of life, different age groups, different religions, and they have to go on an international hunt to find out why these people are tracking them. And these people will not stop. They're utterly relentless and they have international connections everywhere. So Jack Baxi and Aisha Iqbal, I liked putting two people together who have no right to be together, who have no links.
Always great.
And then between them, they have to figure out why people want them dead. And I think that by examining that, it gives me a lot of playgrounds to talk about different socio-political aspects in the book, especially when we get to India and we talk, segregation, identity. It's just really fascinating way for me throwing two people together. But I think that Harry and Jack are extremely polar opposites. But the only thing that is similar about them is that they have this relentless need to find the truth. And they can't quit, won't quit until they find these answers. I enjoy writing characters like that, albeit, if Jack was like Harry, I think that this book would have been half the length because he would have just kicked and I think that, for me, it was quite difficult stepping away from Harry. I've written him for 5 books. And the thing with him is he's so heavily connected. His brother runs, the dark side. Bradford, he's married to Saima, who's a Muslim woman, so they're in this interfaith relationship, and there's a lot of family drama in there because I think that a lot of people who read crime fiction, they like the family element as well of being able to unite or think actually we understand that. So I think that whilst they're both different characters, the books are similar in terms of they're both very pacey. The pace is always the same, and it's It's my absolute thing that I won't compromise on is relentless pace, because I enjoy reading books that way. You know, for me, give me a Dan Brown thriller, and I know that my next 24 hours are gone. Yeah, because it's just relentless pace, and I can never figure out what's going on. You know, he's the master of deception, and I like doing that. I like deceiving people. There's a question on here for you, Joseph, which says, "When did you decide to write under a pen name?"
Well. First of all, let me tell you my real name. This is a good one. So my real surname is Nobbs. So really, it was, you know, as soon as I knew what that word meant, I knew that it would never be on the cover of a book that I wrote. Yeah, so I worked in a bookshop actually for. I went to Waterstones for, God, how long? 8, 9 years, something like that. And one of the most fun events I ever did was with the TV writer David Nobbs, whose name was spelled slightly differently, N-O rather than mine, which is K-N-O. And he teased me at the time. He said I was the wrong kind of knob, and laughed at me because my name was spelled differently. But I kind of knew then, talking to him, just the fact that I got the sense that every event he does or did, he's passed away now, but every event that he did, without fail, he had to say the word knobs and discuss it. And I just didn't want to have to deal with that. I love the name. It amuses no one more than me, I don't think. But I just never really saw it as the right name for a series of thrillers, I suppose.
Okay. And I've got another question here, which is which
one
author?
day, though, I want to write a book that can have knobs on
That
the front.
Front of it. We'll all wait out for that.
Knobs on the front, and indeed throughout. Yeah.
There's a question about which authors have influenced your writing. So for me, I started off with Stephen King. I think I was reading Stephen King probably at the age of 12, which is far too young to probably be reading Stephen King. I started with Thomas Harris with Silence of the Lambs, moved on to Stephen King, and then I probably didn't read very much from the age of 18 to 23 because I was at university studying pharmacy. And once I'd finished my degree, I picked up Tess Gerritsen's books, and I always remember picking up The Surgeon. And I vividly remember starting it on a Friday night and finishing it on Sunday morning and going downstairs to check my windows and doors are locked, which makes no sense because the serial killer in The Surgeon picks on vulnerable women, and I'm not a vulnerable woman. But she'd got inside my head, and I was so terrified that my love affair with crime fiction was sort of reborn after reading Tess Gerritsen. I then binge read everything that she'd read. And more recently, you know, I'm a huge fan of Dan Brown. I think that the way he plots, manipulates the readers, always manages to stay one step ahead. You know, and I challenge myself when I read a Dan Brown book now because I think I've written a few books, I've read a lot of books. I must be able to see the twist, and I don't get anywhere near it. So for me, it was sort of those three writers were king for me. I don't know about you.
I think the most important writer to me as a kid was probably Charles Dickens. Again, it was just one of those things that was on the shelves. I remember becoming obsessed with A Tale of Two Cities. I loved the way, I mean, talk about fact and fiction. He was using this huge historical moment and putting a kind of tragic love story in the middle of it. You know, it's a masterpiece in that sense. But what I really loved was, first of all, his warmth, and his sense of humor, which I was really surprised by. You know, I as a kid, you open a classic book and you kind of think it's all going to be quills and people saying thou and things like that. And I just thought it was really funny and really well written. But what I really loved about his stuff was his character building. And he can really make he can portray a wonderful person in a way that you immediately recognize, but you would never put it in those words. number one. But number two, he's incredible at writing grotesque people as well. And I suppose that is more the lesson that I took from it, because there aren't so many wonderful people certainly in the Aidan Waite's trilogy. They are mainly grotesque. And so that was huge for me. And then, as I say, I came into Chandler as a teenager after being dumped, and those books meant a lot to me. From there, I really became obsessed with I guess all kinds of hard-boiled noir. So I read all those old guys, basically, the Jim Thompsons and people like that, and a lot of weird guys who had just kind of after the war written one novel and then vanished without a trace. And there was often a lot of passion in those books and a lot of unique insight, and so I found those really interesting. And then I suppose the big latter day one for me is James Elroy, who, interestingly, again, now I think of it, is another guy who blended fact and fiction. His breakout book, The Black Dahlia, obviously was based on a real murder, a horrific murder of a young woman called Elizabeth Shaw in Los Angeles. And she, the facts of how they discovered her body are too awful to go into. But Elroy, interestingly, his mother was also murdered some years before Elizabeth Short was murdered, and because of his complicated relationship with her, he was never able to really mourn her. I think, or certainly that's what he said in interviews and things. And so he put all of his grief onto this murder victim, and I find that so interesting. And often, questions are asked even today, and I think rightly so. Do crime writers have the right to murder people in these books and to kind of make entertainment out of it in a lot of cases, even when we're dealing with serious issues? And I just look at the Black Dahlia and I see something so personal. Yes, it's this book about this kind of eviscerated young woman and an investigation into a murder which has officially never been solved, but really it is the grief of a son for his mother playing out on the page. And I think that's what makes it so passionate and so weird and sweaty and uncomfortable. And I think probably
there's a lot
of the three.
There's a lot of personal stuff in both of our books. I mean, I think what you just said there, to come back to you on it, would be the Aidan Waite's trilogy, and I found similarities in True Crime Story. I mean, they're both based in Manchester, and they both look at sort of the student world again. I mean, I just wondered why Manchester again, and why sort of the student world again. Is it just something that comes easily to you, personal to you?
Yeah, well, so I think why Manchester? I've said this so many times, and finally now I've put it in a book. It's in True Crime Story, so I can, I have to officially retire this phrase. But Manchester is the first place I ever had my heart broken, and it's also the first place I ever had my nose broken. It to me, the city is those two things. It is like a man with love tattooed on the knuckles of one hand and hate tattooed onto the knuckles of the other hand, and you never know which one he's going to hit you with next. That is what I love about the city. That is why it's so rich and ripe for crime fiction, and particularly the kind of very nightlife driven crime fiction that I was writing in the Aidan Waite's trilogy. I think the Manchester of True Crime Story is very different, and it's an interesting thing to think about, because really this is a book which takes place not just within a campus, but in a particular tower block. And there is a lot of work in the novel to really, and it's a real tower block, and it's actually called Tower Block. Their imaginations must have exploded when they thought of the name. But it's this real place in Fallowfield in Manchester, and it just has this terrible reputation and this kind of haunting presence, and it's been there since Beatlemania and people are still living in it and it's just decrepit, and every year there's an announcement that it's going to be knocked down, and every year there's a petition to save it because it's such a weird place and people are kind of obsessed with it. And I just thought it was the perfect setting for a book. But although nominally the book does take place in Manchester, I think well, as an illustrative example, when I wrote Sirens, I received a offer from Tobey Maguire's production company to buy the rights to it, but they wanted to reset the plot in America, and to me that just felt wrong. I think Aidan in that trilogy is absolutely intertwined with Manchester, and it would have felt wrong to place it anywhere else, and so I declined that at the time. Whereas I think True Crime Story, because the location really is this tower block, it's the kind of story that can take place anywhere. And I think when people read it, they will kind of transpose their own living experiences, particularly anyone who's lived in shared accommodation or had to live in a flat with strangers, for example. I think they will really see themselves in it and see the reality in it. You know, it's certainly how I spent most of my adult life living, and I just thought it was a really interesting place to set a thriller. But nominally, I suppose I could have set it somewhere else, but I think I needed the certainty of a Manchester that I kind of know inside and out to really nail it, I suppose.
There's a question there. Have we looked back and wondered how? Have you looked back? Have there been scenes that you looked back on and wondered how you wrote them, where you typed faster than you thought? In fact, we're both really different in how we write, aren't we? Because I'm a binge writer, so I have written all of my books, in the bulk of the books, in about a 4-week period of intense writing, where I don't write anything and I don't plan anything. And I think I might be different to Joseph in this. So I'm a pantser. So I just wait until the story's in my head and it's so full in my head that I'm terrified I'll forget something. And then I will start writing. And once I start, I will tend to binge write sort of, 2,000 words in the morning, 2,000 in the afternoon, 2,000 in the evening. It's about 6,000 words. And if I can do that for a week, that's half a book. That's 42,000 words. Now, the words don't make any sense. The plot doesn't make any sense. It's literally everything that's in my brain poured out onto paper. It's not chronological. But in about a 4-week period, I will roughly have 100,000 words, and I have the skeleton of a story. I would never show that to anybody. I'd be horrified if anybody saw it. But I have that. And because I write so quickly, there are absolutely moments where, I can't believe what I've written because A, I don't remember it, or B, I've written it so quickly that I'm amazed at some of the darkness in there. I frighten myself sometimes. And then once I figure out what the plot is, then my second draft will be what most people would probably call a first draft. So I will then realize what the actual story is. I always have a start and an ending. And it's interesting that for The Blood Divide, the beginning of that book came to me in about 2005. Like I said, it's a true story that's been handed down through generations. But I didn't know the ending, which is unusual for me because I always know the ending. So I was hoping, praying that as I was approaching the end of the book, the ending would come to me, and thankfully. So there's absolutely moments and scenes that I've written where, I look back on them, and a specific one in Girl Zero where Harry takes out a bad guy in a really unique way using a car jack and a car to somehow terrify a really bad person, and it's the most commented scene that I've ever written because I've got so many people emailing me saying, how on earth did you possibly think to do that? And I thought to myself, well, I don't know where it comes from. So I mean, that's my writing process, is I don't plan anything, I don't plot anything. I just let it all on the page as quickly as humanly possible. Because if I'm still writing that ridiculous first draft, after 3 months, the story's gone, and it feels wooden, and it feels boring, and it feels like work. You're not like me in that way, are you, Joe?
I think we have more similarities than we might think. So, for example, I have never plotted out my books before I've written them. I think we're similar in the sense that we allow the idea to percolate in our brains for a long time, and then kind of it reaches critical mass, and we have to just get in front of a computer, lock the door, and do it. I'm definitely frustratingly slower than you, and I think in that sense I probably have it slightly easier on the plotting side, because although I haven't planned things out in advance, I really am writing very, very slowly, and it can take me, well, Christ knows, every single one has been different, but the idea of thousands of words in a day is awful to me. I it sounds like too much work, and so what I will probably do on a good day, if I'm really working and I'm at the book and I'm in the zone, I might want 1,000, maybe 2,000 words, maybe. But really, what I'm trying to look at is probably, I don't know, 5,000 a week, maybe. And I think if I'm moving at that pace, my mind is kind of naturally always 2 or 3 scenes ahead, and so I am
Have you got
thinking
with the books that you've written? Have you got quicker as you've written more books, or is it the same? Or easier with book 3 than book 1 or true crime?
I'm hoping now that I have. So Sirens obviously took 8 years, and then Smiling Man took really, I think, 6 months of just hardcore at the desk. Sleepwalker was just a catastrophe of just every spare second for a year, and my partner recently found a photograph of us on holiday at Universal Studios, and we're in line for some roller coaster or something, and I am literally editing Sleepwalker in the line at Universal Studios, which gives you some idea of my particular brand of illness. And in terms of scenes that have surprised me, yeah, definitely, and especially because we're writing like a lot of dark stuff. But I think the one that most surprised me, because it was the first time it ever happened, was I'd been writing Sirens for years or whatever, and I was at the Harrogate Crime Festival as a bookseller, as an employee of Waterstones, and so I got to talking to Lee Child, and there was just some kind of conversation between me and Lee, who is just a wonderful man. He knew nothing about me, and he was just giving me his time and energy and attention, and is just a great advocate of crime fiction and a great guy. And his publisher actually said to me, "Oh, Joe, just in polite passing, it feels like you're one of the family." And Lee said, "Finish your bloody book, and then you can think about being one of the family." And I remember on the train leaving Harrogate, I had my notebook and I just sat down and I wrote like crazy. It was the kick up the arse that I needed. And that was where I came up with the Bug, who is a very weird character in Sirens. He is this cross-dressing BDSM, bizarre, crazy, is he evil, is he good, ghost from Aiden's past, who, in the way that I think the world works, is the last person you would go to for help, and of course is the only person who can help you. And so he crops up at the end of Sirens, and he was just someone who took me so much by surprise, because it was so far from my reality, and it was, I suppose, really where I saw the magic of what writing is, which is you don't have to write what's right in front of you. you can go fantastical and crazy and wild, and sometimes that's the most fun stuff.
It's interesting that Lee Child gave you that bit of advice that made you finish your book, because he did something similar for me as well, which was I was halfway through book 2, and again it was Harrogate Crime Festival. It was late at night. He was standing outside. I was actually waiting for a taxi to leave, and we got to talking, and I was really stuck in the middle of book 2. They always say that book 2 is the hardest one you'll ever write, and he gave me, I think it was 4 or 5 sentences of quite blunt advice, but was absolutely bang on the money, and I never forget it. It was the best advice he'd ever given me, which unfortunately I can't share at the moment.
Did it involve a swear word?
It was very personal to my problem with the book at that moment.
I see.
But yeah, I think the crime writing community are extremely helpful. They're so really supportive and kind of help you through it.
Someone asked how we met on Twitter.
No, we didn't. We met at Harrogate Crime Festival, and this is a true story, which is my publisher had told me that I had to, when I was a debut, a book hadn't come out, and he said I had to work the room. And involved in working the room was the lead buyer for Waterstone's crime fiction, which just happens to be Joseph Knox. So I was shoved over to the corner of the room where Joseph was, and I introduced myself, and he was Mr. Waterstones, and I was Mr. Debut. And I never forget it, because we struck up this conversation about Manchester Comedy Store, because I said I'd been to the Comedy Store recently, and me and Joseph both share this secret, albeit not so secret now, fascination with stand-up comedy, and we got to talking about our attempts to master this art.
We found out how funny we were.
Yeah, and it was really amusing that we've never looked back since. Our first conversation was me trying to impress Joseph to buy my book, and then getting into a conversation about stand-up comedy, and here we are, 4 or 5 years later. I wonder, Joe, if you've had any TV interest in true crime story or any of your books, really.
Yes. So the Aidan Waite's books are currently being adapted by a company called Lookout Point, and they are at the point now where I have seen a couple of scripts, which is very interesting and very exciting and very strange as well. I probably can't say much more than that, although that isn't being particularly coy. There isn't much more to say at this point. Who knows if there will be soon. As for true crime story, yes, as well. Although this is something that hasn't been announced and that I'm probably not allowed.
I'll give us a exclusive then.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just spill my guts. Well, it has been bought by a large company, and that company have hired a writer whose name I can't give you to do something I can't tell you by a date I don't know. And are you excited yet?
Before.
But I have seen a script. Unbelievably, I mean, the book isn't even published yet, but there is a script of a pilot for that, which I thought was excellent. So it's very exciting and it's very interesting. It's so different from the book writing world, and as well, TV kind of has its own unique laws of nature, I suppose. And I think my job as the guy who wrote the books is to keep doing that and kind of hide in the background while the grown-ups have conversations about what will happen with all these things. I'd be thrilled to see something, but my temperament, as anyone who's read my books will know, is to look at the cynical side of life, and so I'm not going to count my chickens on any front until they are right there in front of me, I think.
Okay. Just looking, we've got 3 minutes left to go. Are we at Harrogate this year? One of the questions. Yes, I'm delighted to say that I will be at Harrogate this summer, subject to going ahead, which I think has been announced. I think Harrogate is going ahead.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to going to Harrogate this summer. I hope to see as many of you there as possible. It's always really wonderful to be able to network with readers and other writers. And God, it's been such a long, hard 2 years. It almost feels like now before anybody's seen anybody. I think Harrogate should be a really wonderful event this year. And like I said, I hope to see as many people there as possible. Joe, are you there?
I think I will probably be there as well, yes.
Yeah.
Likewise, just thrilled by the idea of seeing writers and readers again, and being falling down, piss my pants drunk in a corner of the room.
And one of the questions, who is your Harrow date? I don't know what that means, to be honest.
Harrow date? Well, you're mine.
Well, probably yes. I think me and Joseph are each other. Have been.
But by me saying, I think I'm going to be there, what I was really saying was,
yeah,
can I share a bed with you?
Yeah, me and Joseph have to be sectioned from each other when we meet up, because Joe has insatiable appetite to hit on me. It gets very awkward. I'm happily married, but he continues. Continues in vain, and I entertain him because he's had his heart broken once before, as he's mentioned.
Well, I would say you're a tease, really.
I don't like to let you down, Joseph. And interestingly, I think our publishers actually try and keep us away from each other because we're both with the same publisher as well, and they tend to section us away from each other. But listen, it's been a really wonderful evening. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. Thank you very much to Samantha for inviting us on here and entertaining our maybe unique sense of crime fiction interviews. And see everybody at Harrogate. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.